On a research station in the Canadian Arctic in the 1950s, several men fell violently ill after eating the liver of a polar bear. Their skin peeled away in sheets. They vomited for days, some of them for weeks. A few nearly died from something as ordinary as a meal. The liver, it turned out, held such a concentrated dose of vitamin A that it functioned as a slow poison, a danger long recognized in Inuit knowledge, passed down through generations, centuries before any laboratory could explain why. Bury the liver. Never eat it. But the strangest part of that story isn't that a piece of meat could kill you. It's that people had already worked out, without a single instrument or textbook, that certain animals simply weren't worth eating. And once you notice that pattern, something starts to look very strange about your own dinner plate. Because there's one part of this story that makes the whole question even harder to shake. Humans didn't just choose which animals to eat. At some point, we changed them. What that actually means won't make sense for a while, but hold on to it. Walk into any supermarket, and you'll find the flesh of grass eaters stacked in neat rows: beef, lamb, pork, chicken, but almost never the flesh of a lion, a wolf, or a bear. Nobody voted on this. No government banned predator meat. No religious council ever convened to forbid it. And yet across cultures with no contact, no shared language, and no way to compare notes, a strikingly similar boundary shows up anyway. We eat the eaters of grass again and again, and almost never the eaters of meat. If this were simply about danger, we'd never eat pigs, which injure more people every year than most predators ever get the chance to. If it were purely about taste, someone, somewhere, would have made lion meat fashionable by now. And if it were purely religious, the pattern wouldn't turn up in societies separated by oceans, with entirely different gods and no history of contact. One explanation at a time keeps failing. So what's actually going on? Start with the physics of a meal, because energy never lies. Imagine having to feed your family by hunting alone. You could spend a morning tracking an animal that lives on grass, or spend far more energy hunting an animal that spent its entire life hunting the animals you could have simply hunted yourself. Every time life moves up a level in a food chain, a large share of the energy stored at that level is lost, burned off as heat and motion, never passed forward. A cow converts the energy stored in grass into flesh with reasonable efficiency. A lion, living on cows, converts only a fraction of that fraction into its own body. Chasing a lion for food was, on average, a losing trade. Chasing a cow wasn't. But energy accounting alone doesn't explain the visceral recoil most people feel at the idea of a lion steak. That reaction runs deeper than arithmetic. Predators sit at the top of what ecologists call the trophic pyramid, and animals higher up that pyramid can accumulate risks the ones below them simply don't carry. Certain environmental toxins and heavy metals don't break down as they move up a food chain. They concentrate, a process called biomagnification, though it applies to specific contaminants, not to everything a predator has ever eaten. A grazing animal absorbs what's in the plants around it. A predator can end up concentrating certain compounds carried through its prey. It's not that predator meat is silently toxic across the board, but the risk shifts, generation after generation, in a way early humans could observe long before they had a word for the chemistry behind it. Add the parasites. Certain carnivorous species are known to carry trichinosis, historically documented in bears and wild pigs, is one well-known hazard of undercooked carnivore flesh, and the pattern starts to look less like superstition and more like survival data, learned the hard way, through generations of observation and experience, and passed down as instinct. And here the story does something the tidy explanation doesn't expect. Some cultures ate carnivorous animals regularly. Arctic communities relied on animals like walrus, seal, and bear because the ecology around them left no better option. Which raises an odd question. If predator meat is such a poor trade, why did anyone ever eat it at all? The answer is that the same communities who ate bear meat still refused the liver every single time without fail. They weren't following a blanket rule. They'd worked out, through generations of trial and devastating error, exactly which part carried the danger, not blind aversion precision. But that raises an even bigger problem. If humans were really avoiding predators purely because they were dangerous or inefficient, why didn't that avoidance hold when people had no other choice? The answer takes the story somewhere stranger than food alone into the mind, and then into culture. Psychologists who study food aversion describe disgust as one of the fastest, least negotiable emotions the human brain produces faster than reasoning, almost impossible to override once triggered. It evolved, most researchers agree, as a defense against contamination, rotten meat, disease, decay. Carnivores can trigger a different flavor of that same disgust because their food is uncomfortably close to our own. They eat animals, just as we do. Eating something built from other meat eaters can feel, at some pre-verbal level, a little too close to eating something built from us. And once an animal stops being food and starts being a symbol, eating it stops being practical and becomes something closer to a violation. In India, the cow became sacred, its slaughter forbidden on religious grounds tied to nonviolence and cosmic order. In the ancient Mediterranean and Near East, wolves and lions became symbols of kingship and divinity. Egypt's Sekhmet, Rome's own founding myth, nursed by a she-wolf. You don't eat the animal, you've turned into a god. And this is where the open loop from the beginning finally closes. Roughly 10,000 years ago, in the river valleys of the Fertile Crescent and the Indus, humans didn't simply start eating cattle. They began reshaping them generation after generation, breeding for calmness, for tolerance of confinement, for animals that converted grass into meat and milk faster than any wild ancestor ever could. We didn't just choose the cow because it happened to be convenient. We spent thousands of years building the modern cow specifically so that it would stay that way. The lion was unlikely to be a realistic candidate for that transformation because you can't easily breed a strict carnivore into an efficient, docile calorie source. The same energy math that ruled it out in the first place never goes away, no matter how many generations you try. Our plates aren't simply reflecting a food chain that already existed in nature. They're the product of 10,000 years of humans quietly rewriting one. Consider what that means for the animals left on either side of the line. The cow, the sheep, the chicken animals whose wild ancestors were often wary, even aggressive, were bred across hundreds of generations for calmness, for confinement, for rapid growth. The lion, the wolf, the bear were never transformed into livestock on anything like the same scale, still built for hunting, still metabolically expensive, still carrying whatever risk accumulates from a life spent eating other predators' prey. Two branches of the same original choice, pulling further apart with every generation, until the gap between food and not food stopped looking like a decision at all and started looking, to everyone born into it, like the natural order of things. This was never only a story about lions and cows. It's a story about how a practical preference, repeated across 10,000 generations, hardens first into instinct, then into taboo, then into religion, then into a supermarket aisle so familiar it feels like common sense rather than history. What tastes normal to eat was never neutral. It was negotiated by energy, by risk, by disgust, by gods, and by 10,000 years of selective breeding, long before any of us were born to inherit the result without question. So the next time you walk past a shelf of beef, lamb, or chicken, look at it differently for a moment. That aisle isn't a snapshot of nature. It's the surviving edge of an argument our ancestors had with the world, played out over 10,000 years, about what was worth the effort, what was worth the risk, and which animals were worth quietly, patiently, rebuilding from the ground up. The lion was never impossible to eat. We simply spent 10,000 years making sure we'd never have to.